Give me the best surgeon in this city, now. Mr. Alastair Finch's roar vibrated through the surgical observation dome's reinforced glass. Below, in the stark white operating theater, his only son was dying. The hospital's celebrated chief, Dr. Thorne, and his star protégé, Dr. Petrova, stared helplessly as the monitors shrieked, each beep a nail in the coffin of their reputations. For God's sake, get a real surgeon in here! Thorne yelled, his voice cracking with panic. From the shadows of the dome, a man in a faded janitor's uniform, who had been silently mopping the floor, began to walk forward. It was Arthur. Dr. Petrova's eyes narrowed with contempt. What is he doing? Security, get this man out of here. But Arthur's gaze was locked on the chaos below. He raised a calloused hand and pointed towards a small, overlooked monitor. In a voice quiet yet clear enough to cut through the alarms, he said, "You've misread the angiography. The primary graft is failing because of a microclot in the circumflex artery." The room fell silent. The surgeons froze. They were about to learn that the man they saw as less than human was the only one who could save them. The silence that followed Arthur's words was more profound than the blaring alarms. In the sterile, pressure cooker environment of the observation dome, where every second was measured and every word weighed, the janitor's quiet declaration had detonated like a bomb. Mr. Finch, his face a mask of grief, stared blankly, the words not quite registering. Dr. Petrova's lip curled in a sneer of disbelief, while Dr. Thorne, the chief of surgery, simply froze. His mind, trained to process complex data streams and make life-or-death decisions in fractions of a second, could not compute the input. A janitor. A janitor was correcting his diagnosis. The first to break the spell was Thorne. The shock curdled instantly into a hot, volcanic rage. It was a rage born not of arrogance, but of pure terror. The terror of being exposed, of being found wanting in the one arena where he was supposed to be a god. He spun around, his eyes, small and hard, fixing on Arthur. "What did you just say?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. He took a step towards Arthur, his pristine white coat seeming to puff up like the feathers of an aggressive bird. "Who in God's name do you think you are? You mop floors. You empty trash cans. You have no right to even breathe the same air as the people in that room, let alone speak." Dr. Petrova, ever the loyal subordinate and sensing the shift in power, quickly joined the attack. Her voice was sharp, a clinical instrument of disdain. "He's clearly delusional, Marcus. It's the fumes from the cleaning chemicals." She waved a dismissive hand towards Arthur, not even deigning to look at him directly. "Security," she snapped, her voice echoing in the tense room. "We have an employee having a psychotic break. Get him out of here before he contaminates the viewing area." The word contaminates was delivered with surgical precision, designed to inflict maximum damage. She wanted to erase him, to classify him as human waste that needed to be disposed of. Mr. Finch, jolted from his grief-stricken stupor, found a target for his immense, explosive fury. His son was dying, and the hospital's response was a babbling janitor. "Is this what my donation pays for?" he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "A multi-million-dollar surgical wing run by incompetent fools who get medical advice from the help? My son is dying, and you're letting a janitor interrupt?" He jabbed a trembling finger towards Thorne. "I will own this hospital. I will dismantle your career brick by brick until you are nothing. Get this man out of my sight and save my son." The command galvanized Thorne. He needed to reassert his dominance, to crush this absurd rebellion before it could expose the truth. He was lost. He strode over to Arthur, invading his personal space until they were chest to chest. Arthur had to tilt his head back to meet the surgeon's furious gaze. "Let me explain something to you, old man," Thorne spat, his breath foul with stale coffee and panic. "I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School. I completed my residency at Johns Hopkins. I have published 37 peer-reviewed articles on cardiothoracic surgical procedures. I am the god in this building." He poked a rigid finger into Arthur's sternum. "You," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "are a nobody. A ghost who pushes a broom. Your opinion is worth less than the dirt you sweep up. To punctuate his tirade, he glanced down and kicked the side of Arthur's yellow mop bucket. Water, gray and dirty, sloshed onto the pristine white floor. You made a mess. Clean it up. It was a calculated act of humiliation, a public display of dominance. Petrova let out a short, cruel laugh. Be careful not to slip, doctor, she mocked, the title dripping with sarcasm. Some of the junior residents and nurses huddled in the back, who had been watching with wide, horrified eyes, now quickly looked down at their shoes or turned away. No one dared to meet Arthur's eyes. To defend him would be career suicide. In this temple of hierarchy, he was the untouchable, the lowest of the low. His humiliation was a shield for their own fears. Through it all, Arthur remained still. He did not flinch from Thorne's aggression, nor did he react to Petrova's scorn. A profound, deep-seated sadness filled his eyes, the look of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and was no longer surprised by it. He did not raise his voice. He simply tried again, for the sake of the boy on the table. Sir, please, he said, his voice calm and even. Your ECC machine readings are stable, but the cerebral oxygenation is plummeting. The graft isn't the problem. The problem is downstream from the graft. It's a secondary occlusion. You can't see it on the monitor because you're looking in the wrong place. His refusal to be rattled, his stubborn adherence to the medical facts, was more infuriating to Thorne than any shouted retort could have been. It was as if Arthur was on a different plane of existence, one where Thorne's titles and threats were meaningless noise. It was the ultimate defiance. As if on cue, a frantic voice crackled from the operating room's intercom. Dr. Thorne, we're in VFib. He's arresting. The dome erupted into controlled chaos. Charge the paddles to 200. Thorne barked into the microphone, his authority returning now that he had a familiar crisis to manage. Below, the surgical team moved with desperate speed. Mr. Finch was on his feet again, his hands pressed against the glass, his voice a choked sob. Andrew. Oh, God, Andrew. Clear. The boy's body jumped on the table. The frantic beeping of the monitor changed, shifting to a single, continuous, soul-destroying tone. Flatline. The sound of absolute death. The surgeons below looked up, their faces blank with defeat. In the observation dome, the only sound was the dreadful, monotonous drone and the sound of Mr. Finch weeping. The long, unbroken tone of the flatline monitor was a death sentence. It echoed through the observation dome, a sound that stripped away titles, reputations, and wealth, leaving only the raw, brutal finality of failure. The surgical team below stood like statues, their hands hovering uselessly over the still body of Andrew Finch. Up in the dome, Dr. Petrova's perfect composure finally shattered, her face paling to the color of bone china. Dr. Thorne stared into the abyss of his ruined career, the reflection in the glass showing a hollowed-out man. Mr. Finch, the titan of industry, had crumpled into a chair, his body racked with shuddering, silent sobs. It was over. In that devastating silence, Arthur's voice emerged once more, not loud, but with an authority that seemed to bend the very air around it. He is not gone, he stated, his eyes fixed on a small waveform on a secondary monitor that everyone else had ignored. There is still faint electrical activity in the sinoatrial node. It's weak, but it's there. The brain is being starved of oxygen. You have less than 3 minutes to re-establish circulation before the damage becomes permanent. He turned his gaze from the monitor to Dr. Thorne. The microclot is in the left anterior descending artery, just past the first diagonal branch. It's exactly where I said it is. That was the final straw. For Dr. Marcus Thorne, this was a humiliation worse than death. To be proven wrong was one thing, to have his failure dissected and explained by a janitor while a billionaire watched was an agony he couldn't endure. All the pressure, the fear, and the incandescent rage of a fallen god erupted. He snapped. A wild, crazed look entered his eyes. He laughed, a short, barking sound utterly devoid of humor. You, he snarled, whirling on Arthur. You think you know so much? You stand there in your filthy uniform, looking down on us with your mop bucket wisdom? He strode forward until he was once again inches from Arthur's face. The smell of antiseptic and failure rolled off him in waves. He jabbed a finger towards the tragic scene in the operating room below. You want to be the hero? You think you're better than us? He threw his hands up in a gesture of grand, theatrical madness. Fine. You want to be a surgeon? Then go be a surgeon. Go on. Get down there and save him yourself. A collective gasp swept through the room. Nurses covered their mouths. Residents exchanged looks of pure horror. This wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a descent into insanity. Dr. Petrova stared at Thorne as if he'd lost his mind. Marcus, what are you doing? She whispered, aghast. This is a man's life, not a circus. You'll be stripped of your license. Mr. Finch looked up, his tear-streaked face a canvas of confusion, disbelief, and a single, terrifying flicker of hope. What? You're going to let the janitor operate on my son? The idea was so preposterous it barely formed a coherent sentence. But Thorne was too far gone, committed to this insane path. He saw his escape route. It was a move of diabolical, desperate genius. If the janitor went down there and failed, who could blame Thorne? The narrative would be that a deranged employee interfered at a critical moment, causing the patient's death. The blame would shift entirely. And if, by some 1 in a billion chance, the old man succeeded, Thorne could claim it was a moment of inspired, out-of-the-box thinking, that he had sensed a hidden talent and made a maverick's call. He would still be the hero. I am the chief of surgery in this hospital, he announced, his voice ringing with a newfound, albeit unhinged, authority. And I am authorizing it. I am taking full, legal, and professional responsibility for this decision. He turned to a terrified-looking nurse. Get him a set of scrubs. Now. Every second we waste is another second his brain is dying. As the nurse scurried away, Petrova made one last stand. This was not about the patient's life, it was about the sanctity of her world, the impenetrable castle of merit and hierarchy that this janitor was about to storm. She physically blocked Arthur's path as he was ushered towards the door leading to the scrub rooms. You cannot do this, she seethed, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She looked down at his hands, large, calloused, with dirt permanently etched into the lines of his knuckles. These hands clean toilets. They wipe away filth. And you think they can hold a scalpel? You are not a savior. You are a common laborer who is about to become a murderer. She turned her appeal to the only other power in the room. Mr. Finch, I implore you, you cannot allow this to happen. He is a nobody. He will butcher your son. For a long moment, Alistair Finch was silent. He looked at the 2-star surgeons, one broken and raving, the other cold and disgusted. He saw no hope in their eyes, only defeat and blame. Then he looked at Arthur. He saw no arrogance, no panic. He saw only a strange, unsettling calm. An unnerving certainty. He had already lost everything. His son was, for all intents and purposes, dead. The best doctors in the world had failed him. What was left to lose? He rose to his feet, his immense stature seemingly diminished by his grief. He looked Arthur directly in the eye, searching for something, anything, to cling to. Do it, Finch whispered, the words ragged and hoarse. If you think you can save my boy, then for God's sake, do it. The decision was made. The final, desperate gamble was on the table. Without another word, Arthur turned and walked towards the scrub room. As the heavy doors swung shut behind him, a stunned and horrified silence descended upon the observation dome once more. The impossible challenge had been laid down, and the clock was ticking. Right now, at the peak of this impossible moment, a man that the world dismissed is walking into an operating room to do what the world's best surgeons could not. This is a story for anyone who has ever been underestimated, judged by their appearance, or told they don't belong. If you believe that true worth isn't measured by fancy titles or expensive suits, but by the quiet strength and hidden talent within, then take a second to hit that subscribe button. Become a part of a community that celebrates the underdog. You are not going to want to miss the moment the doors to that operating room swing open. Let's watch this miracle happen together. The scrub room was a small, sterile antechamber between two worlds, the world of despair and the world of the impossible. A young, terrified nurse handed Arthur a set of green scrubs, her hands trembling. She expected confusion, perhaps a fumbling attempt to put on the clothes, a final confirmation of the madness that had just been sanctioned. Instead, she witnessed a metamorphosis. The moment Arthur's calloused fingers touched the sterile fabric, the stoop in his shoulders vanished. He moved with an economy and purpose that was breathtaking, his actions governed by a muscle memory that had been sleeping for 30 years. He shed his worn janitor's uniform, the symbolic skin of his quiet purgatory, and stepped into the scrubs as if they were his own. The biggest change was his hands. As he approached the surgical sink, they transformed. He turned on the water with a foot pedal, and as he began to scrub, the methodical, rhythmic motion was not that of a man who cleans floors, but of a high priest performing a sacred ritual. He scrubbed with a ferocious intensity, from fingertips to elbows, his eyes closed in concentration. The nurse watched, mesmerized. The tired, sad old man was gone. In his place stood a figure of absolute, unwavering focus. The janitor had been a ghost, the man before her was a titan. When he finished, he held his hands up and back through the automated doors into the operating theater. The surgical team, adrift in the wreckage of their failure, looked up. The sight of the janitor in scrubs was surreal, but it was the man's presence that shocked them into silence. His eyes, no longer downcast, swept across the room, taking in every monitor, every piece of equipment, every person, in a single, comprehensive glance. His voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. It was not the quiet whisper from the dome, it was the calm, resonant baritone of a commander on a battlefield. "Report," he said, his gaze landing on the chief resident, who stood nearest to him. The resident, a man in his early 30s, was momentarily paralyzed. "Sir." "Status report." "Now," Arthur commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Galvanized by the sheer force of his will, the resident snapped to attention. "Patient is a 24-year-old male, post-cab procedure. Arrested on the table at 1542. 2 rounds of AP, 3 defibrillations, no response. Asystole for the last 90 seconds. Arthur nodded, his mind already working several steps ahead. He began issuing a stream of rapid-fire orders. Restart the ECC pump, but bypass the primary graft and reduce flow by half. I want targeted cerebral perfusion only. Get me a 7 French guiding catheter, a .014 fathom guide wire, and a dragonfly microcatheter. Someone find me a pair of 4.5 magnification loops and adjust this table up by 4 inches. He pointed to a piece of equipment in the corner. And prep that angiography unit for a direct intracoronary injection. We're going in blind. The team stared, utterly stunned. The requests were not just specific, they were the highly advanced, nuanced choices of an elite interventional cardiologist. This wasn't textbook knowledge, this was the language of a master. The head nurse, a formidable woman named Gloria who had seen dozens of star surgeons come and go, was the first to break the spell. She had been in the business for 40 years and recognized the rare, unmistakable aura of genius. She saw it now. "You heard the man." Gloria barked at the frozen team. "Move. Let's go, people, we have a flat line to fix." Her voice, cracking like a whip, spurred the room into a flurry of desperate, purposeful activity. Up in the observation dome, the mood was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Dr. Thorne watched the scene below, his mouth agape. This wasn't part of the plan. He had expected the janitor to stand there, clueless and overwhelmed, a perfect scapegoat. He had not expected a confident, commanding surgeon to take over his operating room. Dr. Petrova stood beside him, her arms crossed, her knuckles white. Her analytical mind was frantically trying to process the data, but it refused to compute. "How does he know that terminology?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Targeted cerebral perfusion, that's a highly experimental protocol. There are only a handful of surgeons in the world who've successfully performed it. She felt a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was expertise. Arthur, now fitted with the magnifying loupes, leaned over the patient. He ignored the surgical field of the failed bypass. His attention was entirely on the monitors. With a deftness that belied his calloused hands, he took control of the imaging system's trackball, manipulating the angiography feed, cycling through images from moments before the arrest. "There," he said, his voice a low hum of concentration. He froze the frame and zoomed in on a section of the artery, a tiny branch that Thorne had deemed insignificant. He tapped the screen. A minuscule, ghost-like shadow, no bigger than a grain of sand, was barely visible. "That's our culprit. The Widowmaker's nasty little brother." It was exactly where he had said it was. Up in the dome, Mr. Finch let out a strangled gasp. Petrova felt the blood drain from her face. She was a brilliant surgeon, with photographic recall of medical literature. In that instant, a memory surfaced, a case study she'd read years ago, a legendary, near-mythical story about a disgraced surgeon from the 80s who had theorized about these exact types of secondary microclots. A man who was laughed out of the medical community. A man named. Before she could finish the thought, a frail, elderly man who had been sitting unnoticed in the back of the dome stood up, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a look of dawning recognition and profound shock. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, Marcus Thorne's estranged father, a retired surgical legend in his own right. He stared at the figure of Arthur in the oar, at his posture, the precise angle of his head, the unmistakable confidence in his hands. "It can't be," the old man wheezed, his voice trembling. "After all these years, it's him. It's Arthur Silva." The name, spoken with such trembling reverence by the old Dr. Thorne, hung in the air of the observation dome like a ghost. Arthur Silva. For Dr. Petrova, the name was a key unlocking a dusty archive in her mind. She remembered the stories now, the cautionary tales whispered in the halls of medical school about the brilliant, maverick surgeon from the 1980s. A man who was poised to revolutionize cardiac surgery, who developed techniques 20 years ahead of his time, only to have his career spectacularly implode in a storm of scandal and litigation. He was accused of a fatal error, his name was dragged through the mud, his license was revoked, and he vanished from the face of the earth. He was meant to be a pariah, a footnote in a textbook on malpractice. He was not supposed to be mopping the floors of the very institution that his rivals now ran. "Silva?" Marcus Thorne repeated, the name meaning nothing to him. "Who the hell is Arthur Silva?" His father, Eris Thorne, turned to him, his eyes filled with a lifetime of disappointment. "He is the man you should have learned from, instead of just learning how to bill for procedures," the old man said, his voice cutting. "He is a genius. And our profession crucified him." Down in the operating room, Arthur was oblivious to the drama unfolding above. He was no longer Arthur Silva, the disgraced surgeon, or Arthur, the humble janitor. He was simply an extension of the task at hand, a conduit for a singular, life-saving purpose. He took the microcatheter from the nurse, and as he did, everyone in the room watched his hands. These were not the delicate, slender hands of a modern surgeon. They were thick, gnarled, the knuckles swollen, the palms etched with the hard-earned calluses of 30 years of manual labor. Yet, the way he held the delicate instrument was a study in contradictions. He held it with an impossible steadiness, a preternatural grace. The hands that had pushed a mop with brute force now guided a wire thinner than a human hair with the sensitivity of a bomb disposal expert. The procedure began. Arthur's eyes were fixed on the angiography screen, a black and white map of the patient's coronary arteries. To the untrained eye, it was a meaningless web of lines. To Arthur, it was a treacherous, familiar landscape. He advanced the guide wire, his fingers making infinitesimal adjustments. It was a journey of millimeters, each one fraught with peril. A wrong move could dissect the artery, causing a fatal hemorrhage. Too much pressure could perforate the vessel wall. It was like trying to navigate a ship through a collapsing cave during an earthquake. The team watched in breathless silence. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the machines and Arthur's low, calm instructions. Easy now, small branch off the septal, let's nudge past it, good. He was in a state of pure flow, his intuition and his hands working in perfect, symbiotic harmony. He wasn't just performing a procedure, he was having a conversation with the patient's body, listening to its subtle resistances, anticipating its reactions. Suddenly, an alarm blared. A sharp, staccato beat that signaled a drop in blood pressure. On the screen, the guide wire had stopped. It wouldn't advance. "He's hit a calcification," one of the residents muttered. "He can't get past it. It's over." Upstairs, a cruel, triumphant smirk flickered across Marcus Thorne's face. "See," he hissed to Petrova. "He's in over his head. The charlatan is killing him." But Arthur didn't panic. His expression didn't even flicker. His eyes narrowed slightly as he processed the new data. This wasn't a hard blockage. The wire was meeting a soft, spongy resistance. It wasn't a calcification. It was a spasm. The artery itself, irritated by the catheter, was clamping down. It was a rare, deadly complication that could lead to a full vascular collapse. Without a moment's hesitation, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable to a conventional surgeon. "Give me 100 micrograms of nitroglycerin in a saline solution," he ordered. The anesthesiologist looked at him, aghast. "Directly into the coronary artery? Sir, that could bottom out his pressure entirely. It could kill him." "It won't," Arthur said, his voice imbued with absolute certainty. "His peripheral resistance is high. This will relax the spasm just enough for me to get through. Do it. Now." In the dome, Petrova gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She understood the breathtaking genius and the terrifying risk of what he was doing. It was a move born of pure, unadulterated instinct. There was no medical textbook on earth that would recommend such a maneuver. It was the improvisation of a master jazz musician, a stroke of inspiration from a grandmaster of chess. It was art. "My God," she whispered, her professional arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only raw awe. "He's not just a surgeon. He's a pioneer." The anesthesiologist, trusting the sheer conviction in Arthur's voice over his own training, administered the drug. The team held its breath. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, on the monitor, the spasming artery relaxed. The path was clear. With a final, delicate touch, Arthur advanced the wire. It slid past the point of resistance and reached the microclot. With a precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics, he deployed a microscopic retrieval device, capturing the tiny clot. He withdrew the entire apparatus in one smooth, fluid motion. The moment the blockage was cleared, the cerebral perfusion monitor, which had been a deathly, static red, exploded into a vibrant cascade of blue and green. Blood flow was restored. A collective sigh of relief, so profound it was almost a sob, swept through the OR. Then, another sound joined the hum of the machines. On the main cardiac monitor, the flat line wavered. A single, beautiful green spike appeared. Then another. Beep. 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 A slow, steady, perfect rhythm. Andrew Finch's heart was beating again. He was back. The return of the heartbeat echoed in the operating room like the first clap of thunder after a long drought. The surgical team, moments ago a unit of defeated soldiers, was now a congregation of stunned believers witnessing a resurrection. They stared at the monitors, their readouts now displaying the beautiful, rhythmic poetry of a stable patient. Perfect oxygen saturation. Steady blood pressure. A strong, regular pulse. It was a miracle woven from skill, instinct, and unimaginable courage. Slowly, as one, their gazes shifted from the monitors to the man at the center of it all. Arthur. He stood for a moment, his shoulders slightly slumped, the immense, divine energy of the procedure draining away, leaving behind the quiet, weary man they thought they knew. There was no triumphant smile, no fist pump, no glance up at the observation dome to say, "I told you so." He simply looked at the patient, a deep, almost paternal gentleness in his eyes. The janitor had returned, but he was forever changed in their eyes. He was a king in beggar's clothing. Gloria, the veteran head nurse, her face etched with the history of 1,000 surgeries, walked over to him. Her eyes, usually sharp and no-nonsense, were glistening with unshed tears. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "In 40 years," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "in this very room, I have seen the best surgeons in the world. None of them could have done what you just did." She paused, then delivered the word that restored his stolen honor. "Thank you, Doctor." Arthur simply nodded, the title settling on him not like a prize, but like a familiar, heavy coat. He began giving quiet, precise post-operative instructions, his voice once again calm and low. "Start a low-dose amiodarone drip to prevent arrhythmias. We need to keep his core temperature at 35 degrees Celsius for the next 12 hours for neuroprotection. Monitor his lactate levels hourly. And schedule a follow-up MRI to assess the level of ischemic damage to the brain." Each command was a pearl of wisdom, a clear and perfect step on the path to recovery. Up in the dome, the emotional fallout was seismic. Mr. Alastair Finch was on his knees, his forehead pressed against the cool glass, his body shaking with racking sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. The titan of finance, the man who could move markets with a word, was weeping like a child. He was looking at Arthur not as an employee, not as a janitor, but as a divine instrument of salvation. Everything he thought he knew about power, worth, and the value of a man had been incinerated in the last 20 minutes. Dr. Petrova stood as if turned to stone, her face a pale mask of shock. The foundations of her world had been dynamited. Her belief in the rigid hierarchy of medicine and the infallibility of credentials and pedigrees lay in ruins at her feet. She looked at her own hands, manicured and acclaimed, and realized they were worth less than the calloused, dirt-stained hands of the man below. He was the surgeon she had only dreamed of becoming. The awe she felt was curdled with a profound and bitter shame. But for Dr. Marcus Thorne, there was no awe, only the black, suffocating abyss of total ruin. His clever, desperate gamble had backfired in the most spectacularly public fashion imaginable. He had not only been proven incompetent, but he had been unmasked by a living legend whom his own father revered. His career wasn't just over, it was a joke, a cautionary tale that would be told for decades. He was a dead man walking. His father, Eris, simply watched the scene below, a single, proud tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. "Magnificent," he whispered. His work complete, Arthur stripped off his gloves and mask, dropping them into a biohazard bin. He turned to leave. As he walked towards the exit, an incredible thing happened. The entire surgical team, residents, nurses, anesthesiologists, technicians, instinctively stopped what they were doing. They turned towards him and parted, creating a silent, spontaneous aisle for him to pass. It was a walk of honor, a tribute of silent, profound respect that no amount of money could buy. He pushed through the doors and came face to face with the occupants of the dome, who had rushed down to the surgical floor. Mr. Finch reached him first. The billionaire was a changed man, his arrogance stripped away, his eyes red-rimmed and humble. He reached for Arthur's hand, the one that had held a mop an hour before, and clasped it in both of his. I don't know," Finch stammered, his voice choked with tears. "Thank you. Oh, God, thank you." Petrova stood a few feet back, her arms wrapped around herself. She couldn't find the words to apologize for her cruelty, but her face said it all. She met Arthur's gaze, and in her eyes, he saw the death of a lifetime of prejudice. She gave a slow, deliberate, respectful nod. It was a silent admission of his superiority. It was her surrender. Only Marcus Thorne could not accept the new reality. His entire world had been annihilated, and he came out swinging at the ruins. He stormed up to Arthur, his face contorted in a mask of pathetic rage. "You had no right," he shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. "This was my OR. My patient. I will have you arrested. I'll have you charged with assault, with practicing medicine without a license. You will rot in prison. The empty threats died in the sterile air. Before Arthur could even respond, Eris Thorne stepped between his son and the man who had just performed a miracle. The old man looked at his son, his face a granite slab of contempt. "Shut your mouth, Marcus," he said, his voice cold as steel. "You are a disgrace to the name Thorne and an embarrassment to this profession." He then turned to Arthur, and his entire expression softened. He extended his hand. "It has been a privilege to see you work again, Dr. Silva." The title, spoken with such weight and respect by a legend of medicine, was the final, devastating blow to Marcus Thorne's world. It was the ultimate validation. Arthur Silva was back. The silence in the corridor after Eris Thorne's pronouncement was shattered by a single, sharp sound, the slap of hands. It came from Gloria, the head nurse, her face streaked with tears as she applauded. Her lone action broke the spell, and a wave of sound followed. The entire surgical team, the residents, the nurses, the technicians who had witnessed the miracle firsthand, erupted into a thunderous, heartfelt ovation. This was not the polite, detached applause of a boardroom. This was a raw, spontaneous roar of approval and awe for the quiet man who had stood against the storm and triumphed. Mr. Finch, his composure completely gone, joined in, his claps echoing like cannon fire in the sterile hallway. Arthur, however, seemed to shrink from the praise. The center of attention was a place he had abandoned decades ago, and he was visibly uncomfortable in the spotlight. He didn't bow his head or puff out his chest. He simply gave a small, weary, almost pained nod to the applauding staff. His victory was not in their adoration, but in the steady beep of the monitor in the room behind him. He turned to the still weeping Mr. Finch and placed a steadying hand on the billionaire's shoulder. "Your son is a fighter," he said, his voice soft again. "Just be there for him when he wakes up." With that, having returned the focus to the patient, he tried to do what was most natural to him, fade back into the shadows. He took a small step back, intending to slip away down the hall. He didn't get the chance. The commotion had drawn the hospital administrators, who arrived to find a scene of utter chaos, a surgical team applauding a janitor, the hospital's biggest benefactor weeping with gratitude, and the chief of surgery standing pale and trembling with rage. It took only a few moments for the story to be pieced together from the emotional testimonies of the nurses and the cold, hard statements of Eris Thorne and Alastair Finch. The karmic justice for Marcus Thorne was swift and brutal. Standing before the hospital's CEO, flanked by a furious billionaire and his own disgusted father, Thorne's fate was sealed. "I want him out of this hospital," Finch stated, his voice low and devoid of its earlier bluster, now carrying the chilling weight of absolute conviction. "Not tomorrow. Not in an hour. Now." Eris Thorne simply added, "He is no longer a son of mine, and he is not fit to practice medicine." There was no defense. Thorne sputtered, trying to quote protocol and regulations, but his words were the pathetic bleating of a dethroned king. 2 stoic security guards were summoned. They flanked Thorne, who looked from the CEO to his father to the face of Arthur Silva, the architect of his ruin. There was no pity in any of their eyes. As he was escorted away, his pristine white coat seeming to mock him, the applause for Arthur finally died down, replaced by the satisfying silence of a long-overdue reckoning. His reign, built on a foundation of arrogance and intimidation, was over. Dr. Petrova did not stay to watch the final act of Thorne's humiliation. She had already turned and walked away, moving like a sleepwalker through the bustling hospital corridors. She reached her office, a sleek, minimalist sanctuary of glass and steel, its walls lined with framed degrees and awards that charted her meteoric rise. She stared at them now, and for the first time, they looked like meaningless trinkets, fraudulent trophies from a game she no longer wanted to play. She sat at her desk, her hands shaking slightly, and opened her laptop. With a few clicks, she bypassed the hospital's public archives and accessed the deep, sealed records of medical litigation from the 1980s. She typed in a name, Arthur Silva. The file was extensive. She read for an hour, her initial clinical curiosity morphing into a sickening horror. It was all there. The groundbreaking research, the revolutionary techniques, and then the single, catastrophic patient death. But as she read the transcripts, she saw the holes. The inconsistent testimony from a key nurse. The lab results that were accidentally lost. And the name of the rival surgeon who led the charge against Silva, who benefited most from his downfall, Dr. Robert Cromwell, the man who had been Marcus Thorne's mentor and one of Petrova's own teachers. She felt a wave of nausea. She hadn't just been mistaken, she had been a willing foot soldier in an army of fools, a proud product of a corrupt system that buried its geniuses and promoted its politicians. Her justice was not a public firing, but a private, devastating crisis of the soul. The reflection staring back at her from the dark screen was of a woman she no longer recognized, and certainly did not respect. By then, the story was already becoming a myth. It spread through the hospital's nervous system, from the surgical floor to the ER, from the cafeteria to the labs. The tale of this janitor surgeon, the quiet old man who performed a miracle, was whispered in every corner. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, and patients were all talking about it, the story growing more legendary with each telling. The world outside the hospital walls had no idea what had happened yet, but inside, a revolution was already underway. A kingdom had fallen, and a legend had been born. Within 12 hours, the story breached the hospital walls and went supernova. A nurse's anonymous blog post about what she witnessed was the initial spark, and the global media was the gasoline. It became the biggest news story in the world. News vans camped outside Metropolitan General like a besieging army. Headlines screamed from every screen, "Miracle Mop Man, Janitor Performs Impossible Surgery," and "The Surgeon in the Shadows, is Dr. Arthur Silva the greatest doctor alive?" His face was everywhere. His quiet, unassuming life was over. Or so the world thought. Job offers flooded in, 7-figure contracts, chief of surgery positions at Johns Hopkins, the Cleveland Clinic, a state-of-the-art research facility in Switzerland funded by a tech billionaire. A Hollywood studio offered millions for his life rights. The world wanted to crown him, to shower him with the wealth and fame he had been denied for so long. But Arthur Silva was not at the press conferences. He wasn't taking calls from his newly hired agent. He was in his small, Spartan apartment in a forgotten part of the city. The janitor's uniform, freshly washed and ironed, was folded neatly on a chair. The television was off. He was sitting at his small kitchen table, nursing a cup of black tea from a chipped ceramic mug and listening to a scratchy vinyl record of Bach's cello suites. A profound and unshakable peace filled the small room, a quiet sanctuary untouched by the hurricane of fame raging outside. He had already been tested by the world's condemnation, its praise was no more seductive. There was a soft knock on the door. Arthur opened it to find Alastair Finch standing in the hallway, looking awkward and out of place without an entourage. The arrogant billionaire was gone, replaced by a humbled, grateful father. He held a briefcase in his hand. "Dr. Silva," Finch began, his voice thick with emotion. What you did for my son, words are not enough." He opened the briefcase. It was filled with bundles of cash. "This is $10 million. A down payment. I will build a hospital wing in your name. A research foundation. Anything. Just name your price. Everything I have is yours." Arthur looked at the money, then into Finch's eyes, and gave a small, sad smile. He gently pushed the door so it was only open a crack. "I'm glad your son is recovering, Mr. Finch. But I can't accept your money." "Why?" Finch asked, bewildered. "Everyone has a price." "Because you're paying for the wrong thing," Arthur said softly. He paused, then decided to share a piece of his soul that he had kept locked away for 30 years. "I had a son once. His name was Daniel. He was 7 years old when his appendix burst. A routine surgery. But the surgeon was arrogant, in a rush. He nicked an artery. My boy bled to death on the table while that surgeon tried to cover his mistake." He looked at Finch, his eyes clear and filled with an ancient pain. "That's why I left medicine. Not the scandal. The heartbreak. The system that protected men like that. I couldn't be a part of it. I didn't save your son for fame or money. I did it for Daniel. For one afternoon, I got to give a father the gift I was denied. A week later, a hand-delivered envelope arrived for Arthur. Inside was a long, handwritten letter. It was from Dr. Lena Petrova. It was not an apology, not in the traditional sense. It was a confession and a promise. She wrote that she had spent the last 7 days using her considerable resources to assemble a legal team to formally reopen his malpractice case from 1988. She had tracked down the retired nurse from the original trial, who was now willing to testify that her testimony had been coerced by Dr. Cromwell. Petrova had unearthed the lost lab results. She was going to clear his name, publicly and unequivocally, no matter the damage it did to her own career. It was her penance. You showed me what a doctor is supposed to be, she wrote at the end. Now, let me show you I was listening. The final scene came a month later. Arthur was at the hospital, not for a meeting, but as a visitor. He sat by the bedside of Andrew Finch, who was pale but smiling, on the road to a full recovery. They didn't talk about the surgery. They talked about books and music. It was a quiet, human connection. As Arthur left, he walked down the familiar, gleaming corridors. He passed the large corner office of the chief of surgery. The gold nameplate that had once read Dr. Marcus Thorne was gone, leaving only 2 small holes in the wood. He continued walking, his footsteps making no sound. As he passed a janitor's supply closet, left slightly ajar, his pace slowed. He glanced inside, at the familiar yellow bucket and gray mop. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. He was at peace. He needed no title, not surgeon, not janitor. He was simply Arthur Silva. And for the first time in 30 years, that was more than enough. Arthur's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is never defined by a uniform or a job title. It's about the quiet dignity, the hidden genius, and the courage that lives inside people the world too often overlooks. Every single day, we walk past heroes without ever knowing it. Now, I want to hear from you. Who is the Arthur Silva in your life? Is there a quiet coworker, a humble family member, or a forgotten mentor whose incredible talent deserves to be celebrated? Share their story in the comments below. Let's fill this space with tributes to the unsung heroes who walk among us. If you believe that everyone has a story worth telling, make sure to hit that follow button and join our community. Thank you for being here and for seeing the greatness in others.